On the battle-scarred planet of Xeranthus, the name Azura Kavarith was synonymous with fear. Towering over most of her kind, her obsidian armor shimmered with a dark, liquid brilliance, and her piercing violet eyes seemed to see into the souls of those who dared oppose her. Azura was no mere warrior. She was a living legend, the indomitable enforcer of the Xeranthi Dominion's rule. Stories of her triumphs echoed across the galaxy, tales of her strength, cunning, and merciless precision. Her enemies spoke of her as an unstoppable force, while her allies revered her as their ultimate protector. But even among her own people, Azura was as feared as she was respected. For her, fear was a tool, a weapon as sharp as her twin plasma glaives. She wielded it to command loyalty, to subdue rebellion, and to crush her enemies without hesitation. This day was no different. The battlefield stretched across the jagged wastelands of the Oroth Expanse, a desolate region where sharp winds howled like banshees. Azura stood atop her hover chariot, her glaives crossed on her back, surveying the opposing forces. They were the remnants of the Scarith insurgency, rebels who had dared to challenge the Dominion's might. They had no chance. She had made certain of that. "Advance," she ordered, her voice amplified by her command helm. It was calm and unyielding, a harbinger of doom. Her forces surged forward, a tide of armored warriors and mechanized beasts. The insurgents resisted, but their efforts were futile. One by one, they fell. Azura dismounted, striding into the fray. Where she passed, chaos followed. Her glaives spun with deadly precision, their plasma edges slicing through armor and flesh alike. The tide of battle turned swiftly in her favor, as it always did. Then, amidst the carnage, her sharp gaze caught something unusual, a small contingent of humans. Azura knew the Xeranthi Dominion had made contact with Earth, though she considered humans primitive and irrelevant. Yet here they were, fighting alongside the insurgents. Their leader, a man clad in dark combat gear, stood out immediately. He moved with purpose, his rifle precise, his every movement calculated. Azura tilted her head, intrigued. She decided to engage. The human soldier, Lieutenant Jack Carter, was no stranger to chaos. As a liaison for the Galactic Accord, his mission on Xeranthus was to broker peace, or at the very least, prevent the outright annihilation of rebel forces. When the Xeranthi Dominion launched their assault, Jack had joined the insurgents to protect the innocent caught in the crossfire. But nothing could have prepared him for her. Azura emerged from the swirling dust like a nightmare given form. Her presence alone sent ripples of panic through the insurgents. Jack stood his ground, his heart pounding as the massive warrior strode toward him. She moved like a predator, her glaives spinning at her sides, the light of their plasma edges casting an eerie glow. "So," she said, her voice a low, resonant hum, "the humans have come to play hero." Jack didn't flinch, though every instinct screamed at him to run. "And you're the infamous Azura Kavarith," he replied, his voice steady. "Guess it's my unlucky day." Azura stopped a few feet away, towering over him. She regarded him with a mix of amusement and disdain. "Unlucky indeed. Do you know what happens to those who stand against me, human?" "They usually don't live to tell the tale," Jack said, his rifle trained on her. "But I'm not most people." Azura's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Interesting. Let us see if you can prove that." Without warning, she lunged. Her glaives cut through the air, blindingly fast. Jack dove to the side, rolling to his feet and firing a volley of shots. Azura deflected them effortlessly, her movements fluid and precise. "You fight well," she said, circling him like a predator stalking prey. "But your defiance is pointless." "Maybe," Jack replied, breathing heavily. "But sometimes the fight itself is the point." Azura's eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected resistance, let alone this kind of resilience. She struck again, and Jack dodged, managing to graze her armor with a shot. Her amusement deepened. "Bold," she said, pausing to examine the scorch mark. "But boldness without strength is foolish." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he moved swiftly, throwing a stun grenade. The blinding flash momentarily disoriented her, giving him a chance to reposition. When her vision cleared, she found him standing several meters away, his stance firm. "You have my attention, human," Azura said, her voice quieter now, laced with curiosity. "Few dare to stand against me, and fewer still survive. Tell me your name." "Lieutenant Jack Carter," he said, lowering his weapon slightly. "And I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to stop this slaughter." Azura tilted her head, studying him. Fascinating, she murmured. You are either the bravest human I have met, or the most foolish. Jack met her gaze, his determination unwavering. Maybe a bit of both, but if you're so terrifying, why haven't you killed me yet? For the first time, Azura hesitated. There was something in his defiance, something in his unwavering gaze, that unsettled her. She couldn't remember the last time anyone with anything other than fear. Perhaps, she said slowly, lowering her glaives, you are not what I expected. Before Jack could respond, the distant sound of reinforcements broke the tense silence. Azura straightened, her commanding presence returning. Our battle is postponed, Lieutenant, but know this, I will not forget you. With that, she turned and strode away, leaving Jack to wonder what had just happened and what it might mean for the battles yet to come. The encounter with Azura Kavareth left Lieutenant Jack Carter's mind spinning. As the dust of the battlefield settled, he found himself replaying their exchange. She could have killed him, should have killed him by all logic, yet she hadn't. Instead, she had studied him with a curiosity that bordered on unsettling. Back at the insurgents' hidden camp, Jack sat around a flickering holomap with rebel leaders. The meeting room was dimly lit, the air heavy with tension. The insurgents were divided. Some viewed Jack as an invaluable ally, while others distrusted him as an outsider. This is madness, snarled Varen, a grizzled rebel commander. His cybernetic arm whirred as he pointed to a cluster of red markers on the map. Kavareth will come for us. You've seen what she's capable of. Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I've also seen her hesitation, he said. She's not invincible. She's calculating, precise, but she's not a mindless monster. Varen scoffed. And that's supposed to help us? If anything, it makes her more dangerous. Another voice, calmer, interjected. Perhaps it also makes her more reachable, said Lara, a young insurgent strategist with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. If Kavareth can hesitate, she can reconsider. Maybe there's a way to turn her against the Dominion. Jack glanced at her, intrigued. You're suggesting we make her an ally? Unlikely, Varen growled. Kavareth has no loyalty but to herself and her empire. Jack looked down at the holomap, his fingers tracing the Dominion's expanding influence. Every empire has cracks, and every warrior, no matter how fearsome, has a reason for what they do. If we can understand her, we might find a way to stop her, or at least keep her from annihilating us. The room fell silent, the weight of Jack's words settling over the group. Finally, Lara spoke. It's a gamble, but it might be our only shot. Meanwhile, in the Dominion Central Fortress, Azura Kavareth stood in her private quarters, staring out at the sprawling cityscape of Zoranthus. The twin moons cast a pale glow over the jagged spires and bustling streets below. Yet her mind was not on the city or its people. It was on him. Jack Carter. The human had been unlike anyone she'd ever faced. His movements had been deliberate, his gaze unwavering. Most remarkable of all, he had spoken to her, not with fear but with conviction. It was disconcerting, even more so than his refusal to submit. Azura turned to the central console in her quarters, activating a holographic display of the battlefield's recordings. She watched their duel again, analyzing every movement, every word. Her glaives had been flawless, her attacks precise, yet Jack had held his ground. Why didn't I kill him? She murmured to herself. The answer eluded her, and that infuriated her. Azura prided herself on her clarity of purpose, her unwavering resolve. Yet this human had unsettled something deep within her, a curiosity, a flicker of doubt she couldn't explain. Commander, came a voice from the comm panel. It was General Kel Voss, her second in command. You've been requested at the War Council. Azura straightened, her expression hardening. I'll be there shortly. As she donned her battle armor, her mind returned to Jack. She couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again. The next skirmish between the Dominion and the insurgents came swiftly. The insurgents had launched a daring raid on one of the Dominion's supply outposts, drawing Azura and her forces to the front lines. Jack Carter was among the raiding party, leading a small team tasked with retrieving critical resources. The battle was fierce, the night sky illuminated by bursts of plasma fire. Jack moved through the chaos with practiced precision, coordinating his team's movements. The insurgents had made progress, securing several supply crates, but the arrival of Azura's forces turned the tide. Azura herself descended into the fray, her glaives cutting through the insurgent ranks with terrifying efficiency. Her presence was a force of nature, driving the Dominion soldiers forward with renewed vigor. Jack's comm crackled to life. "Lieutenant, we're pinned down," came Lyra's voice. "Azura's leading the charge." Jack's heart raced as he scanned the battlefield, his eyes locking onto Azura's unmistakable figure. She was cutting a path toward the insurgents' central position, her every movement deliberate and deadly. "Hold your position," Jack replied. "I'll draw her away." He broke cover, firing a volley of shots to get her attention. Azura's head snapped toward him, her violet eyes narrowing. She began to move, her steps purposeful. Jack retreated, leading her away from the main skirmish. They found themselves in a narrow canyon, the jagged cliffs amplifying the echoes of the battle. Azura stopped several paces away, her glaives humming softly. "You again," she said, her tone laced with both annoyance and intrigue. "Do you have a death wish, human?" Jack raised his rifle, but didn't fire. "Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to talk." Azura tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Talk? In the middle of a battlefield?" "Why not?" Jack replied, lowering his weapon slightly. "I'm curious. Someone like you could have ended this rebellion a dozen times over. But you haven't. Why?" Azura's gaze darkened. "Because I do not act without purpose. These insurgents are vermin, but even vermin can serve a greater lesson." "Or maybe you're not as cold as you pretend to be," Jack countered. Her eyes flashed with anger, and in an instant she was upon him. Her glaives spun and Jack barely dodged the strike. He raised his rifle, but instead of firing, he blocked her next attack, their weapons locking. "You are bold," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "But boldness without strength is foolish." "Then call me a fool," Jack said, his breath ragged. "Because I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to stop this madness." Azura hesitated, her glaive still pressing against his rifle. "Madness? You think this war is madness?" "I think it's a waste," Jack said. "Your people, my people, none of us are winning here. And I think you know that." Her grip on the glaives tightened, but she didn't strike. For a long moment, they stood locked in place, their faces inches apart. Jack could see the conflict in her eyes, the war raging within her. "You confuse me, human," Azura said finally, stepping back and lowering her weapons. "You fight with conviction, yet you cling to ideals that have no place in war." "Maybe," Jack said. "Or maybe conviction is exactly what we need." Azura studied him, her expression softening ever so slightly. "You are a strange one, Jack Carter." "And you're not as terrifying as you want people to think," he replied with a faint smile. Azura's lips twitched, as if fighting the urge to smile herself. "We will meet again," she said, turning and disappearing into the shadows. Jack watched her go, his heart still pounding. He didn't know what to make of their exchange, but one thing was certain. Azura Kavareth was not the monster he had expected, and she, it seemed, was beginning to see him as more than just another enemy. The encounter in the canyon weighed heavily on both Lieutenant Jack Carter and Azura Kavareth. For Jack, it had been a gamble, an attempt to appeal to the humanity he suspected lingered beneath her terrifying exterior. For Azura, it was a moment that gnawed at her clarity of purpose, a rare and disconcerting hesitation that refused to leave her thoughts. Back at the insurgents' camp, Jack's team gathered around a holographic map, reviewing the results of their recent mission. The raid had been a partial success. They had managed to secure vital supplies but had suffered heavy losses in the process. Lyra, the strategist, leaned against a table, her sharp eyes fixed on Jack. "You faced her again, didn't you?" Jack nodded, his gaze distant. "Yeah, and I think I'm getting through to her." Varen, the grizzled commander, slammed a metallic fist onto the table. "Getting through to her? She's a killer, Carter. The longer you entertain these fantasies, the more lives she'll take. She could have killed me twice now," Jack argued, his voice steady. "But she didn't. That hesitation means something." "It means she's toying with you," Varen snapped. "And while you're playing hero, we're the ones paying the price." Lyra intervened, her tone measured. "Jack might be onto something. If there's even a chance we can sway her, it could change everything. Azura isn't just a warrior. She's the Dominion symbol of fear. If she turns, the entire Dominion could fracture." Jack nodded. "Exactly. But I need more time." Varen shook his head, muttering under his breath, but said nothing more. The tension in the room was palpable, but Jack was resolute. He knew the risks, but he also knew that Azura was not the mindless enforcer she pretended to be. Meanwhile, in the Dominion's fortress, Azura stood before a council of Dominion generals. The room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the battlefield. Sterile and imposing, its walls lined with holographic displays of Dominion victories. General Cale Voss, her longtime rival, addressed the room with a smug tone. "Commander Kavareth, your delays are becoming problematic. The insurgents grow bolder by the day, and your reluctance to crush them raises questions." Azura's violet eyes narrowed. "My actions are calculated, General. Rushing into battle without understanding the enemy's motives is a fool's strategy." Cale smirked. "And yet insurgents remain. Perhaps your calculations are flawed." The tension in the room was thick, but Azura remained composed. "The insurgents will fall," she said, her voice like steel. "And when they do, it will be on my terms, not yours." Cale leaned back, his smirk fading. "See that it's done, Commander. Or perhaps the Dominion will need new leadership." Azura clenched her fists as she left the council chamber. The weight of their scrutiny pressed heavily on her, but her mind was elsewhere. It was on Jack, the human who had defied her, challenged her, and made her question everything she thought she knew. The next encounter between Jack and Azura came under unusual circumstances. The insurgents had intercepted a Dominion communication, revealing plans for a surprise assault on a neutral village caught between the two factions. Both sides viewed the village as expendable collateral, but Jack saw an opportunity to act. He and a small team set out to warn the villagers, arriving just in time to see Dominion forces assembling in the distance. Jack's heart sank when he recognized Azura at the forefront, her imposing figure unmistakable. "Stay here," he ordered his team, stepping forward with his hands raised. The Dominion soldiers tensed, their weapons trained on him, but Azura raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. "Lieutenant Carter," she said, her voice cold but curious, "you have a habit of appearing in unexpected places." "I could say the same about you," Jack replied, meeting her gaze. "This village isn't part of your war. These people are innocent." Azura's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Innocence is irrelevant in war." "It shouldn't be," Jack said, his voice steady. "You don't need to do this. Call off your attack." The Dominion soldiers exchanged confused glances, their grips tightening on their weapons. Azura's grip on her glaives remained firm, but she didn't move. "Why do you care, human?" she asked, stepping closer. "Why risk your life for those who can offer you nothing?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Jack said simply, "and I think you know that." Azura's eyes bore into his, searching for something she couldn't name. She turned to her soldiers, her voice commanding, "Stand down." The soldiers hesitated, but obeyed. The tension in the air didn't dissipate, but the immediate threat had passed. As the Dominion forces withdrew, Jack exhaled in relief. "Thank you," he said, his tone sincere. Azura didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "You confuse me, Jack Carter. You speak of right and wrong as if they are absolutes. In my world, they are luxuries we cannot afford." "They're not absolutes," Jack admitted, "but they're worth striving for." Azura tilted her head, studying him. "Perhaps, or perhaps you are simply a fool who does not yet understand the cost of your convictions." "Maybe I am," Jack said with a faint smile. "But you haven't killed me yet, so maybe there's a part of you that agrees with me." Azura's lips curved into a faint, fleeting smile before she turned and walked away, her soldiers following in her wake. Jack watched her go, the weight of their interactions settling over him. Back at the village, Lara met him with a questioning look. "She let you go?" "She let all of us go," Jack replied. "Maybe she's starting to see the bigger picture. Or maybe she's playing a long game," Lara warned. "Be careful, Jack." "I will," he said, though his thoughts were far from cautious. For the first time, he felt the fragile beginnings of trust between him and Azura. It was a dangerous gamble, but one he was willing to take. The uneasy truce forged in the neutral village lingered in Azura Kavareth's mind. It wasn't just Jack Carter's words that haunted her. It was the look in his eyes, the conviction she couldn't shake. For a warrior who had always trusted her instincts, this new, uncharted territory unsettled her. Back in the Dominion's fortress, Azura found herself poring over battle reports with growing disinterest. Each victory felt hollow. each directive from the Dominion Council more oppressive. General Kale Voss, ever opportunistic, seized upon her apparent distraction. "Your hesitation endangers us all," Kale said during a strategy meeting. His tone dripped with condescension. "The insurgents grow bolder, and yet you indulge in stalling tactics." Azura's violet eyes flashed with anger, her voice cutting through the room. "Careful, General. I have achieved more for the Dominion than you ever will." Kale leaned forward, his smirk unwavering. "Then prove it. Crush the insurgents, or perhaps you've lost your taste for battle." Azura clenched her fists but said nothing. The truth was, Kale's words stung because they carried a kernel of truth. She was questioning her path, and it was all because of one stubborn human. In the insurgents' camp, Jack Carter prepared for another mission. The intelligence gathered from the neutral village revealed a critical supply line fueling the Dominion's war machine. Disrupting it could turn the tide of the conflict, but the mission would take them dangerously close to Azura's territory. As the team readied their gear, Lara approached Jack, her sharp eyes filled with concern. "You're hoping to see her again, aren't you?" Jack hesitated before answering. "If we cross paths, I need to know if she's wavering, if there's a chance she'll join us." Lara frowned. "She's a warrior, Jack. She's not going to abandon everything she's fought for." "Maybe not," Jack admitted. "But I've seen something in her, a part of her that doesn't want this war any more than we do." Lara sighed, shaking her head. "Just don't let your faith in her get us killed." The mission began under the cover of darkness. Jack and his team moved swiftly through the dense terrain, their objective clear: sabotage the Dominion supply convoys. But as they approached the target, a shadow loomed over their plans. Azura's forces were already there, reinforcing the convoy. Jack's heart sank as he spotted her amidst the Dominion troops, her imposing figure unmistakable. She moved with her usual precision, directing her soldiers with quiet authority. Jack signaled for his team to hold back. He needed to act carefully to avoid turning the mission into a bloodbath. But as he crept closer, his calm crackled softly. "You should leave, Jack Carter," came Azura's voice. He froze, glancing around for the source. She stood on a ridge above him, her glaives glinting in the moonlight. "This convoy is under my protection. If you attack, I will defend it." Jack straightened, his heart pounding. "You don't need to protect it, Azura. This war isn't worth what it's costing your people." Azura descended the ridge with slow, deliberate steps, her soldiers watching from a distance. When she was within earshot, she spoke quietly. "You assume much about my people, about me." "I've seen enough to know you're not like the rest of the Dominion," Jack said. "You care about more than conquest. So I keep fighting." Azura's expression flickered, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her usual stoicism. "Because it is all I know." "Then maybe it's time to learn something new," Jack said, his voice steady. "This doesn't have to be your legacy." Azura studied him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then, to Jack's surprise, she turned to her soldiers and gave a quiet order: "Withdraw." The Dominion troops hesitated, but obeyed, retreating into the shadows. Azura turned back to Jack, her voice softer. "You continue to confuse me, human." Jack allowed himself a faint smile. "Maybe that's a good thing." The next day, word spread quickly through the insurgents' camp. Azura Kavareth had spared their mission. Some saw it as a trap, others as a sign of hope. For Jack, it was a small but significant victory. In the privacy of her quarters, Azura struggled with the implications of her actions. Sparing Jack and his team had been a decision born of instinct, but it carried consequences she couldn't ignore. The Dominion Council would demand answers, and Kale Voss would seize any opportunity to undermine her. Her comm panel chimed, and Kale's holographic image appeared. His smirk was as infuriating as ever. "Interesting reports from the front lines, Commander. I hear you allowed insurgents to escape." "They were insignificant," Azura said coldly. "Not worth our resources." Kale's eyes narrowed. "Do not mistake leniency for strategy. The Council will not tolerate weakness." Azura ended the transmission without another word. She leaned against the console, her mind racing. Jack's words echoed in her thoughts. "This doesn't have to be your legacy." That night, Jack sat alone by a campfire, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. The other insurgents kept their distance, wary of his growing connection to Azura. Lara eventually joined him, her expression unreadable. You think you've won her over, she said. I think she's starting to question things, Jack replied. And that's enough for now. Lyra studied him, then nodded. Just be careful. If she turns on us, we won't survive. Jack didn't respond. He knew the risks, but he also knew that Azura wasn't the monster everyone believed her to be. The next time they met, it was by design. Azura had sent a cryptic message requesting a secret meeting away from prying eyes. Jack arrived at the designated location, a quiet glade hidden deep within Zoranthus's forests. Azura stood waiting, her glaives sheathed, her armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She looked almost serene. You came, she said. You asked, Jack replied. Azura hesitated, then spoke. I cannot continue this path. The Dominion's goals are no longer my own. Jack's breath caught. Are you saying you'll help us? Azura's gaze hardened. I am saying I will not fight for them. But trust is a fragile thing, Jack Carter. If I stand against the Dominion, I risk everything. Then let me make it worth the risk, Jack said. Together, we can end this war. Azura held his gaze, her expression softening. You are relentless, human. Perhaps that is why I cannot ignore you. Jack smiled faintly. Or maybe you just like me. Azura's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. Perhaps. In that moment, the terrifying warrior of the Dominion and the defiant human soldier found themselves united by something far more powerful than war. A fragile, tentative hope for a better future. The tension on Zoranthus had reached a boiling point. The Dominion's forces were preparing for a final, decisive assault on the insurgents, their war machines lined up along the horizon like harbingers of doom. Azura Kavereth stood at the forefront of her troops, her violet eyes scanning the battlefield. She had once taken pride in such displays of power, but now they only filled her with unease. Her thoughts lingered on Jack Carter, the human who had challenged her worldview. His defiance had planted a seed of doubt, and over time, that doubt had grown into something she couldn't ignore. She had made her decision, but acting on it would mean betraying the Dominion, turning against the only life she had ever known. Behind her, General Keelvoss approached, his presence as unwelcome as the grim orders he carried. The Council demands results, Commander, he said, his tone sharp. No more delays. Crush the insurgents, and let this rebellion die with them. Azura didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tightened her grip on her glaives, the weight of her choice pressing down on her. And what of the innocents caught in the crossfire? She asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. Kale sneered. Innocents? There are none in war. You know this. Azura turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. Perhaps I no longer do. Kale's smirk faltered. Careful, Commander. Your hesitation is becoming a liability. Without another word, Azura strode away, leaving Kale seething. She made her way to the Dominion's communication center, where she sent an encrypted message to Jack Carter. The time had come. At the insurgents' hidden base, Jack received Azura's message. The room was filled with wary silence as he read her words. The Dominion moves at dawn. I will stand with you. Lyra frowned as she leaned over his shoulder. Are you sure we can trust her? Jack looked up, his expression resolute. She's risking everything to help us. That has to mean something. Varen grunted from across the room. Or it's a trap. Jack stood, his gaze sweeping the room. We don't have another option. If Azura's with us, we might have a chance to stop the Dominion for good. After a tense moment, Lyra nodded. Then we make our stand. The battlefield was a chaotic tapestry of fire and steel as the insurgents clashed with the Dominion's forces. Explosions lit up the sky, and the ground trembled under the weight of towering war machines. Amidst the chaos, Jack led his team with precision, every move calculated to disrupt the Dominion's advance. Then, like a shadow slicing through the flames, Azura appeared, her glaives spun with deadly grace, cutting through Dominion soldiers with ruthless efficiency. But for the first time, her attacks were not fueled by conquest. They were acts of rebellion. Her presence sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Dominion soldiers hesitated, their fear of her clashing with their confusion over her betrayal. Keelvoss, watching from a command platform, snarled in fury. Traitor, he bellowed, pointing toward Azura. Kill her. Azura turned toward the command platform, her violet eyes blazing. She fought her way through the Dominion ranks, her every strike a declaration of defiance. Jack saw her intent and moved to support her, his rifle taking down enemies who tried to block her path. When they reached Kale, the general was waiting with a blade of his own, his expression twisted with rage. "You disgrace the Dominion," he spat, charging at Azura. Their duel was brutal, each strike echoing with the weight of their shared history. Azura's movements were precise, her glaives a blur of light, but Kale was relentless, his attacks driven by fury. Jack provided cover, fending off Dominion soldiers who tried to intervene. Finally, Azura saw an opening. With a swift, decisive strike, she disarmed Kale, sending his blade clattering to the ground. She held her glaive to his throat, her expression cold. "The Dominion's reign of terror ends here," she said. "Tell the Council they no longer control me." Kale sneered. "You think you can escape their wrath? You are nothing without the Dominion." Azura's gaze didn't waver. "Perhaps, but I am no longer their pawn." She struck with the hilt of her glaive, knocking Kale unconscious. Turning to Jack, she extended a hand. "Let's end this." Together, they led the charge, rallying the insurgents and defecting Dominion soldiers. The tide of the battle shifted, and by dawn, the Dominion's forces were in full retreat. As the sun rose over the battlefield, Jack and Azura stood side by side, their armor battered, but their spirits unbroken. The insurgents cheered, their victory hard-won and deeply felt. "You did it," Jack said, glancing at Azura. "We did it," she corrected, her voice soft. She turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost." "What's that?" Jack asked. "Hope," she said simply. For a moment, the chaos of the world around them faded, and they stood together in quiet understanding. Azura, once the most terrifying warrior of the Dominion, had chosen a different path. A path forged by trust, conviction, and the unlikeliest of bonds. Jack smiled, his voice steady. "This is just the beginning." And as the first rays of light broke over the horizon, Azura and Jack walked forward together, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in their lives, they were free. Not just from war, but from the chains that had once defined them.